even say the industrial leaders at the front line of these efforts. And we are in close cooperation and very much appreciate how these companies also help Europe to maintain its competitive edge in design, innovation, and sustainability. And with the COVID-19 crisis, I would say accelerating the twin green and digital transition, we need innovation now more than ever. With batteries, we have already made a strong start. In 2017, as I'm sure you know, together with industrial actors coordinated by InnoEnergy, I established the European Battery Alliance to develop an innovative, sustainable and competitive battery value chain. And the batteries are undoubtedly vital, including for Europe's automotive industry, which today employs 14 million people, as it was already said by the minister, and provides over 7% of the EU's GDP. What we expect is that by 2030, over 50% of passengers vehicles sold in the EU will be electric, compared to 2 or 3%, which is the case now. 3 years on, and the European Battery Alliance is already a resounding success. It showcases the 21st century approach to the industrial policy of the EU and its partners. It also combines the support for strategic value chains in an integrated way with the environmental objectives. The European Battery Alliance has so far attracted around 440 industrial actors and some 100 billion euros in investment in the drive to create a globally competitive and sustainable Europe battery industry, which we hope will provide up to 4 million jobs by 2025. It is a flagship alliance for Europe, providing a ready-to-use blueprint for other strategic sectors, for example, the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, which will be launched next month, and alliance on rare earth and magnets, which is expected later this year. But perhaps the biggest success of the EBA is how it has changed the mindset around batteries in Europe. There is now a wider understanding of the essential role of batteries in delivering the EU's strategic objectives of industrial competitiveness, decarbonization of the economy, and increased resilience and strategic autonomy in critical industrial sectors. There is also growing recognition of the need to reduce our overdependence on third countries, both for batteries and the raw materials needed to make them crucial to boosting our strategic autonomy and reliance in this area. For example, 73% of the batteries bought in the EU are made in China and only 6% in Europe. And it's a similar picture with the key raw materials. 48% of graphite is imported from China. 68% of cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and 78% of lithium from Chile. So it's very important for us to make sure that we will look closer at this challenge. And as you know, I work very closely with my fellow commissioners on work stream related to batteries in areas such as industrial strategy, financing, and research and innovation. And that means that batteries would feature high on the Commission's political agenda and are part of its strategic initiations such as the European Green Deal, the circular economy, and the COVID-19 recovery strategy adopted last month. And I also have to say that while the pandemic has had a devastating impact on our economy, not to mention its horrific human cost, it has not changed our strategic objectives. On the contrary, there is now a need to accelerate our efforts and push for a truly sustainable and digital European industrial policy to boost our recovery and increase societal and industrial resilience. Game-changing new clean technologies are key to Europe's future, including in its ability to continue to be a global economy and a global actor. So it is vital we put them at the core of the recovery, not only because many of them, including batteries, have the potential to boost economic growth and create jobs, but also because they will contribute to making Europe fairer, greener, and more digital, as well as more resilient. This, of course, will require significant cooperation and joint effort from the EU, its member states and partner countries and industrial actors. Now it's the time to mobilize all our resources across the whole value chain and press hard on the accelerator of the European Battery Alliance. So how do we drive the European battery ecosystem ahead? There are four main strands of work which are essential to speed up the delivery of the European battery ecosystem. First, we need to provide industry with a robust, comprehensive and fit for future regulatory framework to ensure that batteries placed on the EU market, regardless of their origin, meet the highest standards in terms of performance, durability and safety, as well as a responsible sourcing of the raw materials and environmental impact, which includes the carbon footprint over the entire life cycle. The new framework will be complemented by the high quality and timely standards developed by our standardization bodies, Senelec, and there we need to move quickly on this one, and our aim is to hold the first trilogue meeting with the European Parliament and the Council on the proposed regulations still under German 2020 presidency. Second strand, it's very important that we would push for increase of the leveraging of investment in the strategic battery projects. Here the task is twofold. Approval of the second German-led important project of common European interest. This year, I believe, would be critical and decisive to ensuring that the continuation of the strategic projects in Europe will evolve further. And I believe that this second very important so-called IMSE project will be completed by the end of this year. Then we need to prepare a strategic approach on battery financing to ensure that the substantial chunk of the enormous amount of resources available under the European Recovery Plan, which is a total firepower of 1.85 trillion euros, is used to support investment in batteries across the whole value chain. To this end, I'm working closely with my colleague, Commissioner, as well as with the European Investment Bank, which has committed to allocating 1 billion euros to the batteries value chain in 2020 alone. Third, we need to step up research and innovation on batteries and ensure that the new Horizon Europe research program, which is replacing Horizon 2020, and its strategic planning fully reflects the strategic political priorities of the Commission, and that the batteries receive a suitable share of the 15 billion euros allocated to the relevant cluster 4, which is aimed at climate, energy, and mobility. Our research activities should, of course, span all the stages of the batteries value chains from chemicals to recycling, while also focusing on integrating research into the industrial ecosystem in order to shorten the transition from lab to the market. The newly established partnership for batteries needs to play a decisive role here. And finally, we need to continue increasing Europe's resilience with regard to critical raw materials. In the short term, that means seeing adoption of the new raw materials action plan together with the launch of the Alliance on Rare Earths and Magnets by early autumn. And I believe that this in turn will strengthen Europe's resilience with regard to raw materials. It would help us to reduce our dependence on third countries, and it would allow the EIB financing of domestic mining and processing projects, which would have a positive influence on the environmental and social sustainability of the supply chain. Together, I believe these measures will help to put Europe into the driving seat when it comes to batteries. So I, together with my fellow commissioners, am committed to deliver on these measures in a timely manner. And as I have said, however, this is a joint enterprise, and I also count on continued effort, cooperation, and expertise as we seek to fully charge Europe's battery industry. To conclude, allow me again to say thank you to the organizers of this webinar, as well as Inna Energy for its excellent steering of the European Battery Alliance, and to all of you for your commitment, hard work, and personal engagement in this vital undertaking. I know that many of you in the Nordics are starting your summer breaks next week. So let me also wish you a good summer. And I hope you will be able to alla det batterien god sommer, which was my best Norwegian, in which I wanted to wish you a nice summer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, we are sorry about the technical issues that we are facing. I just want to make sure that we are working on solving it, and the live stream should be up now. Also, don't worry, we will tape. The event has been taped, and everyone will get a link to that tape right after the show. So don't worry about that, and sorry about the mix-up. So continue.
No problem. No problem. Yeah. Not at all.
Thank you for your speech, dear Vice President, and you are most welcome to Norway anytime to try the autonomous electric transportation project here. A warm welcome. And thank you for underlining the essential roles of batteries delivering on EU strategic objectives for industrial competitiveness, the decarbonization, resilience for critical industry sectors of Europe. And also for highlighting the need for a strategic approach on battery financing to increase the investment in strategic battery projects. Also mentioning the resources allocated by the European Investment Bank. You highlight the sourcing of raw materials and sustainable sourcing of raw materials. This will be something we will discuss in our next webinar in August, and we'll pick up on that one. We are now opening up for a Q&A. Mr. Vice President, you will be with us a little bit longer in this Q&A. And with us to moderate this, we have representatives from the Norwegian battery cell industry. We have the CEO of Beyonder, Svein Kvernstuen, Tom Jensen from Freyr, and Terje Andersen from Morrow Batteries. These three companies represent cell production at various maturity stages, and together they represent the Norwegian addition to the Nordic cell production scene. You will alternate the questions per gentleman's agreement, so please behave. And we start off by giving the floor to Tom Jensen.
Thank you very much. And dear Vice President Šefčovič, I'd just like to congratulate you on taking leadership in this critically important transformational industry. Also, the role that you've taken together with InnoEnergy in making sure that the European Battery Alliance is such a powerful tool is something that is obviously very important for the development of Europe as a resilient area for its own battery cell production and establish captive value chains for this critically important industry. Now, you mentioned in several occasions raw materials and the critical link that raw materials play strategically in this value chain. Could you expand a little bit on the measures that the EU is taking to ensure that we don't risk shifting ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels rather to a dependence on raw materials? It would be great to get some added perspectives on the specific initiatives that are being undertaken to ensure that we can also create a more resilient raw material supply chain in Europe.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your kind words, but also for putting the very pertinent question. I think that we all are realizing right now that if you are talking about raw materials, especially the critical raw materials, so this is the new big thing. And therefore, this is one of our priorities upon which we'll be working together with the commissioners, especially with Thierry Breton during this mandate. We, I think, realized even more under the latest pandemic crisis how the raw materials and strategic value chains are very important for the good performance of the European economy. And the raw materials are of critical importance if it comes to the future-oriented, game-changing technologies and sectors. I think we want, as I said in my introductory remarks, to be greener, to be cleaner, to be more resilient. So for that, we need the new technologies like batteries, like PVs, like windmills, like good computers. And the fact is that for all that, we need the raw materials from the third countries, and we are realizing and discovering how the situation in supply of that critical raw materials is increasingly challenges. So what we see in our preliminary analysis is the fact that demand for the raw materials is increasing. For example, the EU would need just for the batteries for electric vehicles and energy storage up to 18 times more lithium in 2030 and almost 60 times more lithium in 2050 if we compare it with today's consumption. And currently, as you rightly pointed out, we are heavily dependent on third countries. 48% of graphite comes from China, 68% of cobalt comes from Congo, 78% of lithium comes from Chile, and almost 100%, 99% of rare earth is coming from China. So it's clear for us that we need to strengthen our resilience with regard to the raw materials, and it has to be a key component, I would say, part of Europe's strategic autonomy to ensure that we would have much higher resource security. And I have to say, it very much reminds me of my work, which I was doing 5 years ago, where we've been working on diversifying of fossil fuel supplies, making sure that we have well-working internal market, that we have proper interconnection among our member states. We would never be put in the situation where we could be blackmailed by anyone or pushed into the tight corner where we really be very much squeezed if it comes to our future economic choices. Therefore, this autumn, we will adopt the first strategic foresight report looking at the resilience across the board with concrete case studies, including one on the raw materials. We are going to work with a number of indicators where we will try to measure and monitor this continual evolving state of vulnerability and resilience capacity with regards to the raw materials. What we need is to adapt the strategic approach to the raw materials with our other policies, and therefore we also want to make sure that we are going to kind of replicate the lessons learned from the Battery Alliance, and we will adopt the action plan for raw materials, and at the same time to launch a strategic dedicated alliance on rare earth and magnets. We are thinking currently about 3 work streams. The first one would be on diversification of supply of routes of critical raw materials, especially nickel and cobalt, by making greater use of the trade diplomacy, by concluding new bilateral agreements where in our, for example, free trade agreements would be a dedicated clause on sustainable mining, processing and supply. Then we want to offer greater support to domestic sustainable sourcing of primary raw materials. And here we are looking at such a twofold approach. First, facilitation of permitting procedures and access to financing. And in this context, already this year, we are going to update the critical raw materials list. And we definitely will put the lithium on it because EIB could support the economically viable lithium mining projects in Europe even more. Currently, just for your information, we have 4 projects in a pipeline in Portugal, in Spain, in Czech Republic, and in France. Our estimate is if all these 4 projects would go ahead already by the mid of the next decade, we will be able to cover around 80% of processed lithium, because we do not want to mine, we also want to process the lithium, which is important for our battery projects. And the third work stream should be the reduction of the need for primary critical raw materials through circular economy. And I think that this is the key objective for upcoming regulation and batteries. We want to collect the used materials, reuse them, recycle them, and I believe it would put us in a much better situation. So these are just few ideas which I would tell you upon which we are working right now. But you're absolutely correct. This is big challenge, and this is really very uphill walk. But I'm sure that we will find a good solution to resolve it.
Thank you very much, and good luck. And we hope to be able to support it as much as we can.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice President, for a very interesting speech. And I also appreciate your focus on the 4 strengths that you mentioned. You have in these mentioned that the sustainability, which is extremely important, could be a great contributor to the competitive advantage of Europe on batteries. Could you please give a bit more details about the legislation that is in the making on this?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sven, and you rightly pointed out that once we see the batteries as a game changer in how we are going to make European economy greener and cleaner, of course, the role of the batteries is irreplaceable. And we discovered very quickly that what our industry expects from us and what it needs and how we can best chart the way forward, this is through the appropriate battery regulation. And we want to see also this as a game changer in the way how we are working on the future oriented technologies. And I believe that it would have the same effect as a emission regulation and emission trading scheme had on the European economy. Why is it so important? If you just look at the first quarter of this year, and we all know that there was a huge crisis that was extremely difficult for everyone, but the fact is that the sale of electric vehicles in the first quarter of this year, if you compare it to the first quarters of 2019, despite all the difficult circumstances, so there were more electric vehicles sold in Europe. If you look at Germany, the increase was of 148%. In France, it was 123%. In Sweden, 87% more of electric vehicles been sold comparing to the last year. And at the same time, we saw that there was the reduction of sales of combustion engines. In France, 25%. In Germany, 25%, France 39%, and Sweden also 25%. So I think it's also seen that despite the difficult circumstances, also I would say the mood of the consumer is shifting, and they're much more conscious about the environmental impact of smart mobility and electric vehicles. So therefore, we are putting a lot of efforts, and we are working very hard to prepare this new fit for future comprehensive regulatory framework for batteries. And as I said, we really want to adopt it in October. We want to address all the critical aspects, including due diligence on responsible sourcing of raw materials. We want to measure carbon footprints, covering the whole life cycle. Performance and durability would be very important for us. As I mentioned, circular economy, recycling, and the battery passport. I believe that through this regulation, we would have also the possibility to be much more effective in market surveillance and auditing. And that would help us to be more forceful in making sure that we would be properly enforcing that regulation within Europe, but also setting, I believe, the world global standards for other countries which are outside of the EU. What we want to do is to set the right level of ambition and where possible and where we have enough of the data, also with the limit values depending on the availability and of course recent updates of the data which we have at our disposal. So we are clearly aiming and making sure that this regulation would become the worldwide benchmark. And to make the difference, this regulation would require good standards, meaning methodologies and testing method, but also we want to ensure that the proposal would be accompanied by, as I said in my introductory remarks, by the strong mandate to the EU standardization bodies. I'm sure that you are all from the industry, so you know CEN-CENELEC very well, and we want to do this process in parallel, to start negotiations on the regulations by the co-legislator with the European Parliament and member states, the Council, but also to issue immediately strong mandate for standardization bodies, so we really would proceed with the appropriate speed and have a good, a highly valued regulation, but at the same time very, very high standard. So this is, I think, what we are planning for this year. Just the last word on timeline. As I said, we would like to deliver the proposal by October, and I have preliminary agreement with the German presidency that we will both work very, very hard to make sure that we will have a first trialogue already by the end of the year. So this is the plan, and as I said, we want to start parallel process with the standardization body. So this is, I would say, very, very very challenging schedule, as you can imagine, but there is strong intention on our side to deliver on time, because you know how important it is for the European industry.
Thank you very much. It is extremely important, and yes, quite impressive on your ambition on this rather tough timeline. So thank you very much for a good answer.
Thank you again, Mr. Vice President. Exciting to hear about all the initiative going on. You mentioned the important project of common European interests. What type of project are applying these days? And what type of project should use important projects of common European interest going forward? And last one, do you recommend Norway to participate in the program?
Thank you very much, Terrier. When we've been looking through the ways how we can best promote, I would say, these new technologies, and also to cover what we felt was a gap on European market, so we very quickly concluded that the IPSAID could be a right answer for certain type of the industrial projects for the future. And at this stage, as you know, we are in the process of assessing the IPSAID on batteries. It's called pre-notification stage, which is a German-led, and I think that currently there are around 14 members who are interested in it, and we have very important market players, important companies who are presenting their projects. And here again, the schedule is very tight. So we believe that by the end of this year, hopefully all the work on this would be concluded from the side of the companies, but also from the side of the European Commission. And we, I think, are also going to benefit from the experience we gathered during the first IPSAID, which was led by France, and there I think we had also very good experience, and I can say that in record time we managed to achieve very good results. Overall, the IPSAID, as you know, this is the abbreviation for our approach, how we can approve the special state aid framework for projects from all sectors of economic activity. And the notified project in this case have to comply with the conditions linked with this scheme. What they are, I mean, first and foremost, they have to contribute to the common EU objectives. It means that they have to have significant impact on competitiveness of EU economy. They have to support sustainable growth and also address societal challenges. The second condition is that they have to be of the major innovative nature. I mean, of course, it's R&D or the first industrial deployment of the new innovative technologies. And the third, which is also very important when we started with IPCEIs for batteries, this was how can we address the market failure due to a very considerable level of technological and financial risk. And of course, we always want to have partners from the private sector. So also the IPCEI projects must involve the private financing by the beneficiaries, and it has to have this, I would say, across the border nature. So it should involve several member states with wider benefits for the European economy. So these are, I would say, the criteria against which we are considering the IPCEI projects when presented to us. I have to say that my colleague, Margaret Vestager, the Vice President responsible for competition, did a marvelous job on this, because I think we really developed the new way how to promote the technologies which are so crucial for the European twin transition success. And then, of course, in the process, we are communicating very closely with the EU member states, but not only, because there is very close cooperation with EFTA authorities, and this is for the member states and companies involved in IPCEI to decide which countries can join. So I would say that Norway would always be welcome. And just to conclude on the first experience with France, just to give you the perspective how this first IPCEI IPCEI project led by France been completed. So we had in the end 7 member states: Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Sweden, in agreement to support research and innovation in the area of batteries. These 7 member states are providing in the coming years more than 3 billion of euros in funding for this project. And the expectation is that this investment would unlock an additional 5 billion private investment. So it's just one IPCEI project. We have more than 8 billion of euros invested in there. And I would just recall that thanks to the great work of InnoEnergy and the financial platform, we are now see that there is more than 100 billion of euros channeled towards the project supporting European Battery Alliance and this development of new ecosystem, which I believe would be of the crucial importance for the European industry. So thank you very much for all the 3 questions. They've been very much to the point, and I hope that I've been able to inform you about some additional details which would convince you that this is very important technology and that we are very much looking forward to cooperate also with the great companies from Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very, very interesting insight. Back to Nora and her team.
Thank you guys for that, and thank you, Mr. Vice President, for that interesting Q&A. There's no doubt that we will see a lot of activity in this sector in the next couple of months, and that strong international collaboration will play a significant role to the growth of this sector. So next on the agenda, we have the chairman of the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise, Arvid Moss, and the chairman of the Swedish Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, Fredrik Persson. They are both senior executives in the industry sector in the Nordics, and today we are welcoming them to a conversation around the theme how Nordic collaboration can boost the Nordic battery scene and help deliver on EU Green Deal and new industry strategy. And we have them both with us now, I think. So without further ado, Persson will start this section off followed by Moss. And they will self-moderate their own conversation to leave out any technical issues. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. And how's that for a sustainable solution? And I think you're a too brave person leaving this to Arvid and I. Let me start off and congratulate you on a great seminar, but on an even greater topic. And I know we were supposed to focus on batteries, but to start off, I would only like to say from the side of Swedish enterprise, I think one key here is the European Green Deal. And I would like to say that from the Swedish side, we fully and wholeheartedly support that deal. We think it's key for getting Europe forward. It's key for a modern Europe. It's key for a competitive Europe. So that is sort of at the start of what we're discussing today. And I think Sweden and the Nordic region and Norway are extremely well positioned to be in the center of the European battery industry. And I'm going to point at some advantages or positions that we have currently. I think we're 1 or 2 steps ahead in Sweden, but I think Norway is trailing and have all the possibilities to be on a same level and to catch up. And the reason for that, I think, is one prime advantage and key winnable here is to have good and reliable supply of renewable energy. I mean, if you look at producing a battery, for every kilowatt hour of battery capacity in the production process, you need some 100 kilovolt to get the battery done. So energy prices will be key here, and the access to sustainable and renewable energy will be key. So here we both have a strong advantage with the hydropower we have. But to get ahead, it's also important to have an industrial tradition, and I would say that's served Sweden well. I mean, we have the entrepreneurs, and we will later on listen to Northvolt, and I think nothing happens without the entrepreneurs and people with the drive. But we do have an industrial tradition of both raw material extraction, but not the least also of recycling. And I think recycling is here key, because we have to look at the whole value chain. I mean, stretching from the raw material extraction all the way to the recycling. And here I would take my hat off for Hydro and the Norwegian initiatives that are done with Northvolt on the recycling side. So here I think Norway is already playing catch up. We've already heard the discussion on the rare earth metals, and I think this will be a challenge. We do not want to end up in a situation where we become as dependent on metals that we are on today on fossil fuels. But I think there are some promising signs here. If you look at geological surveys, I think there could be the possibility to extract these type of metals both in Norway and in Sweden. And as said, we have a long-standing traditions of raw material extraction in Sweden, and we also have the companies that produce that type of equipment. And to that point, I think you also have the market uptake. To get industry going, you really have to have the demand. And I think here Norway has been a good first mover on the car scene with a high level of electrified cars. And we are seeing the same to a certain extent in Sweden. But we're now also moving into the electrification of heavy vehicles. And I would really like to lift the example of Swedish company Epiroc that is currently electrifying the mining industry. So creating sustainable mining, which is both important in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of getting the rare earth metals. My final point would be on the recycling side, looking at the whole cycle from the metal extraction to the recycling. So that would be really, really important to have good recycling. And here I would also lift the Finnish example. We have some good examples of recycling in Finland, and we have a strong tradition in the whole Nordics. These were the positives. Aren't there any negatives? I think there is one, and there's of course that we have an extremely high personnel cost in the Nordic countries. And one could then, of course, ask, is this a great disadvantage for us as compared to the countries where we see battery production today? I would say that personnel cost is not a large part of the battery production, and we're also in the need of highly skilled labor, which I think is a great advantage for both Norway and Sweden. So I think that is a challenge that is definitely able to handle. So I think Sweden is maybe a step or two ahead, and I would put that to the strong entrepreneurs behind Northvolt, the strong network of Swedish industrial companies that have been supporting Northvolt. But I see no reason why we shouldn't, on a Nordic level or a Norwegian level, come as far. Thank you.
Thank you, Fredrik, and I can subscribe to what you say about the Green Deal in Europe. I think it's extremely important for all of us that we see this movement in the right direction. And all of you should also know that the Nordic countries and Fredrik and myself, we have a voice in Business Europe where we really try to push the green agenda. And I think we have moved some of the attitudes in Europe, I would say, on this topic, because it's so important. Well, on the batteries, I think you are right, Fredrik. Sweden is a little bit ahead when it comes to industrialization, while Norway has been ahead when it comes to introducing electrical vehicles and also batteries in the ferry sector. 10 years ago, 1% of the new sales was electrical vehicles. This year, so far, 50% of the new sales of passenger cars are electrical vehicles. So it's a fantastic development, of course, with a lot of support from the state. But also on the ferry side, we have now more than 20 ferries that are operated on batteries, and within short that will increase to some 60 to 70 ferries. So of course there is a market that is been developed in Norway. I think we have had good incentives to do this, but what has been the worry of NHO and myself has been that too little of the value creation, too little of the value chain behind this electrification is left in Norway. So we have taken some initiatives also in NHO to look at what can be done to create more, let's say, value creation in Norway, more in industry, more workplaces. I think we have a good chance going forward. And as president of NHO, I see quite a lot of things happening now on, let's say, along the value chain from R&D to recycling. The strong R&D environment in Trondheim and in Oslo University and IFE is a good support now for many companies. Of course, we also have a lot of startups that are now emerging, small companies that are really looking for opportunities in the value chain. And then, of course, we have, as a third element, we have the strong cluster of process and material industries, the Elkems, the Glencores, the Hydros, etc. in Norway, and that is a tradition to really build business that matters. And batteries is really about building business that matters. This will be a big industry in the next decade, and let's say the large enterprises in Norway are really let's say looking into opportunities now. I think you have had some great entrepreneurs in Sweden, and we need them in Norway as well. But I think also it's important that the large enterprises involve themselves. And then I would again, as let's say state of today, the maritime industry just developing themselves pretty fast. So what is now ongoing in Norway? I think that on the upstream part, that means on processing of raw materials and what goes into the cell manufacturing. There are some initiatives. Elkem is doing something on the pilot plant for anode material. But I think also when it comes to graphite, cobalt, nickel, lithium, we see some initiatives coming up to start up. On cell production, as we have heard already, it's Morrow, it's Freyr, and it's Beyonder that are all, let's say, in the early days of creating a foundation for cell manufacturing in Norway. On packaging and integration, both Siemens and Corvus have established specialized plants in Norway to deliver battery systems to the maritime sector. And as you mentioned, Fredrik, on recycling, we just announced the 50-50 joint venture with Northvolt. What is very good with Norway, and that is also true for Sweden, is that a very good support from let's say public, let's say from the state sector. We have Enova in Norway, which invests in and give grants to green projects, and last year it actually gave more than 500 million euro to this. So it's important to have these vehicles to get us through the first phase. So I think that we have a lot to work on, and I think that there's a lot of interest now, and I think that the point is that this business will be built in partnerships. I think that is also why it's so important that we talk in partnerships in Norway, but it's also important to see these partnerships across Norway, Sweden, because we are, let's say, this is too big for one country. I think we can be much stronger if we work together. I think that the examples we have, talking from as my professional job in Hydro, I really see that we have not been where we are today without the joint ownership in Corvus with the Equinor and the Shell and the others who really took this forward because they wanted to develop something for the offshore and the oil supply side. We had joined with a small position in Northvolt last year because we saw that Northvolt was really spearheading the development, and the cooperation with Northvolt is developing gradually and now with the joint venture on recycling. And we also look at other places where we can mature opportunities. But all in all, Fredrik, I think that the dialogue between the Norwegian and Swedish companies should be enhanced. We should really look for where we can, let's say, not only go alone, but go together. And in Brussels, and then the European car industry is really looking for companies like we have in Norway and Sweden. And you mentioned one thing, of course, the renewable power is very important, but you also mentioned the workforce. And I think that we have a highly educated workforce with the best opportunities to run highly automated equipment, and this industry needs to be very, very highly automated to be competitive. So a lot of interesting things going on. So I think it's more. So what do we do next, Fredrik? So going back to you, what can we more do together to develop towards the European supply chain?
Thank you, Arvid. Now, coming back to your question, I think very much is in the word producer and the end part of that being user. I think a huge advantage for Sweden has been the strong industrial heritage we have with companies like ABB, Epiroc, Atlas Copco, Volvo, that are really embracing the effects of sustainability and electrification, seeing that they've been producing these type of products for decades and centuries, and they're now adapting to the new normal of electrification. And I think that is such a good breeding ground when you see companies like Northvolt coming up, that if you have the user of the product, you also have the skilled laborers, you have the engineers. I think we have to be realistic there on the Nordic side, that we do have a highly skilled labor force, but we always stand the risk of falling behind because we see a strong development in India and in China when it comes to the number of engineers. So I think we also have to push in the educational system to both reskill the workforce, but to add the number of engineers in both our countries, because if we're going to be successful, we really have to work hard on that. And I know there's a lot of exchange between the universities in the Nordic region. Once the UK leave the EU, none of the top 10 universities in the world will be within the EU. And of course, Norway is not within the EU, but I mean, working closely with the Danish universities, the Norwegian universities, I think we can create an educational and a university force that is really, really strong, and that will help support and be a playground and a breeding ground for these type of new ideas.
I agree with you, and I think that you have the the Scanias and the Volvos, that is really an important consumer group over time, and we have the maritime sector, and
Exactly.
it's one of the largest in the world, and you start out with the ferries, and then you take larger and larger vessels, and I think that, of course, over time, batteries will also meet its limits, but then it's more over to hydrogen and other stuff. So, but there's a long way to go before we have explored all the opportunities in the maritime sector, and I think that this kind of cooperation also with the main customers are very important. But one thing that you also touched on, Fredrik, I think that to really we have to really strong on technology development, because I think that's the only way to succeed over time in this business. We cannot rely on, let's say, others' technology or let's say being licensed from abroad. I think that we need to really put more money into research, development, and innovation, and commercialize these ideas. Because if we are not, let's say, aspire to the podium on the battery technology, I think we will lose out, even if we have a lot of good things. So this, how do we really ensure that enough is now put into the advanced research and development, and also that we as companies do enough?
And I think also looking at the value chains, there are some, if not tough decision, I think a bit unusual decisions to be made. And I mean, currently Europe is completely dependent on imports from China when it comes to rare earth metals. And also, to be honest, I mean, many of the battery minerals are today sourced from countries that have questionable labor standards and low environmental requirements. And at the same time, I think we have the same situation both in Norway and Sweden, that it's extremely hard to start a new mine. To get the permits to start a mine could take 10 to 20 years. We haven't started a new mine in Sweden in a decade. This is something we're discussing very much with the government. But and it really looks at, when we're talking vanadium, cobalt, graphite, lithium, these type of rare earth metals are present as we see it both in Norway and Sweden. And I think it is tough in the general public to open up mines, but I think we have to be realistic and say, hey, we can create a sustainable production value chains for batteries, starting from the raw materials to the extraction to the recycling. Then I think we have to be brave enough to make that type of decision, and also have the discussion with politicians. How can we do this as sustainable as possible? It's not sustainable just sort of sending these type of mines away to other countries, in the same discussion as we're saying that if we push away industry to other parts of the world, we would become more sustainable. I think that is not the way forward. So we really have to look at those parts as well.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And I think that what kind of footprint do we import? I think that will be more and more important. And that's been a discussion also on carbon leakage from Europe. But I think we need to have the same kind of discussion on the input material to batteries. What kind of, let's say, what kind of footprint do we import if we import this from countries where we know that the standards are different and where the environmental footprint is different. So I think that the idea of, let's say, looking at the far upstream, that means the mining part of this value chain is also important, and that we also go with full force into the recycling part of it, because it's really the most. It's so obvious that we have to take care of the material through the life cycle, but I think on the, you said on the public side, it's challenging with the mining, and I think we all experience this, whether it's wind power or mining or whatever in Norway as well. But I think we have to face the dilemmas, and we have to go into that discussion saying that, you know, we to solve, let's say, one of the most important topics, we have to find also sustainable ways of doing mining and getting the power into the batteries. It's not only about, let's say, it's not only about driving the car with green energy. It's also about how do you produce those batteries.
And I think it's very much the responsibility of organizations such as NHO and SN to take the educational challenge here and explain why it's good to do this and what type of challenges we have if we do not do this. And a bit on that note, and I know we were supposed to talk batteries, but I like to take the opportunity just to say a couple of words on CCS, carbon capture storage. I think that is a great opportunity for Sweden and Norway as well, and something that we could explore together. Could be huge challenges and opportunities on that side. And I think there Norway is so much ahead, and we could do extremely good progress on that side. So really putting in a good word for CCS.
I know that will be a lot of hooray in Norway for that comment, Fredrik. So you'll be a friend of Norway based on that one. So,
yeah. Hopefully you will open up the border and I'll come and enjoy it as well.
So that was the background for the comments. Yeah. No, but Fredrik, you are absolutely right, and I think that CCS is important. Hydrogen is going to be important. Batteries is going to be important. All of this is part of the green future, and I think that. Like we have the European Green Deal, it's really also about the Nordic Green Deal, and as in many other topics, we should really spearhead what is going on in Europe. So I really look forward to this kind of discussions going forward, because this is too big to be solved by one company. It's too big to be solved by one country. This is really a global issue, and at least the Nordic countries, I remember we have seen this, let's say, figures about if we combine the GDP of the Nordic countries, we are not that small. So with the industrial competence we have, we should really be able to drive the development in certain areas.
Now, my final comment as ahead of the Northvolt presentation would be that it might seem as an easy journey, but it's been extremely tough journey for Northvolt when it comes to getting the right type of permits and the way they decided to locate where they did. So I think it's been a rough ride on the Swedish side as well, to make that point. Yeah.
But we will come back to Northvolt, but it's been a great journey that they have done. I think on the barriers, we are supposed also to give some comments on barriers. I think that there are of course always barriers, and you touched on some of them on the licensing and permits and so on. Of course, there is also from time to time you meet, let's say, a lot of let's say stiffness in the public let's say support system, where you have to go one new door every week to get all the different support systems in place. But that is also things that we have given input to the Norwegian government, that they have to simplify the support system and make it easier for business to get through, let's say, with the good ideas. But I think these are minor things. I think that we have to remove the barrier that is about, let's say, sharing ideas. I think that is the most important thing. This is, as I said, this is too big to be solved by one company. I think that we have to really create create the arenas for cooperation to going forward. And if we can through this kind of seminars and otherwise take down the barriers between us, Fredrik, between the countries and between the companies, I think that is important going forward.
No, and I think this is not something that is best solved on a national level. I think it's extremely important that we do cooperate. And to your point, Arvid, we can see the leverage that the Nordic countries get down in Brussels. And we are, as to your point, the 10th largest economy when we join our forces. And we also have a shared history and a common legacy, which means that it's easy to agree on things, but still doing it with enough tension to create creativity.
Very good. Well, I guess our conversation goes towards the end, and this was supposed to be part of the visit by the Crown Prince to Sweden in May. That didn't take place. Hopefully they will come next year, so that we have a chance to see your beautiful country. But anyhow, I think that also to those behind this seminar, that let's see what we can do next year, if we can have follow-up. And I am sure that in 12 months' time, a lot of things have happened along the value chain in the batteries in Norway and Sweden.
I'm positive on that, and thank you for arranging this. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Arvid.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Arvid and Fredrik. Fredrik, you mentioned the electrification of the mining industry in Sweden. And Arvid, you mentioned the development of electrification of maritime sector in Norway. And when it comes to electrification of transportation, we see that Norway and Sweden are leading interesting projects that can complement each other, being a good starting point for collaboration. You also mention that we do have access to raw materials in the Nordics. We can extract in a sustainable way. With the Northvolt project being the first one on cell production, we have the usage. We also are developing now the recycling part of the battery value chain. This shows that, as you mentioned, Fredrik, we are very well positioned in the Nordic countries to be in the center of the European battery industry. So thank you for highlighting this. You spoke about Nordic collaboration in your conversation. And we do have with us the Swedish cell manufacturing company Northvolt that recently announced a joint venture together with Hydro in Norway. And we now want to welcome Emma Nerenheim to the digital stage. You will give us a presentation on how the Nordic cell manufacturers can produce the world's greenest lithium-ion batteries and share some more insights of the status of the Northvolt project. So welcome to the stage, Emma.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone, especially hello to everyone in Norway. It's an amazing journey that we are about to start, entering yet another market and bringing our battery cells and third-party battery cells back to new battery raw materials. I'm going to come back to that, but what I want to do is to start by just briefly introducing Northvolt and introducing myself. So my name is Emma Nerenheim. I'm the Chief Environmental Officer at Northvolt. It's been now a journey for 3 years for me in the company and just a couple of months more for the company as a whole. We are a very rapidly growing startup in Sweden. It was not obvious that the company would actually start in Sweden. It was the founders moving back from Silicon Valley, California, with several years of experience in building Tesla from the top and from the start, and finding that the European market has a huge journey to be done in order to make it in the electrification, especially in the transportation sector. Interestingly, this was the kickoff of basically all the activities that we see now. Peter and Paolo really managed to build an incredibly strong team. They managed to find the perfect plot for the first factory to be built in the Nordics here in Sweden. And they also managed to merge the expertise from the Japanese and Korean battery manufacturing that is already ongoing in Asia, basically the leading battery manufacturing in the world, and together with the Silicon Valley spirit and the industrial traditions that we have here in the Nordics. So it's a pretty amazing team that is now here in Sweden starting to commission the first industrial plant in Västerås and also building the Skellefteå plant. And one of the main differentiator that were seen already from the start and were enabling also Europe to be in the future standing out significantly from basically all other battery manufacturers is the ability to build something that is fully sustainable from the start. So normally when I talk to people about this, I say, let's do it right this time. And all the advantages we have here in the Nordics, we actually can do it right this time. We have a very strong, as I said, industrial tradition. And not only that, we also have a very strong authority tradition. So our authorities here in the Nordics are used to, in collaboration with industry, putting standards to protect not only people, but also the external environment from potential harm but also looking ahead for several generations. And I think that utilizing this mixture of internationalizing the industry again, that we have done so many times in the Nordics, but also bringing in the strong tradition of doing it in a sustainable and well thought out way, I think is going to be key for the Nordics to be differentiating within Europe, but first and foremost for Europe to be differentiating globally. And this enables, in its turn, the vehicles sold from Europe to have a very strong sustainability brand all over. And I know that the Commission is working very strongly to preserve this commitment and to make it some kind of label or something that is very strong going forward. The interesting journey that we have seen so far in Europe is actually that we have introduced a lot of renewables. That market has been growing pretty impressively. I would say we have seen the introduction of solar, the prices going down for solar. We have seen wind, and we have the strong tradition in hydropower and so forth. The challenges have been to create a market that is incentivizing the further build out, but also to manage the increase in energy demand in the industrial sector, which is pretty often a bottleneck also here in the Nordics, even though we have the hydropower. And to manage this, to really continue not only incentivizing the build out of renewables, but also to manage utilizing all the renewables in the best way, batteries have been lacking. And by introducing a strong battery industry, introducing batteries to the grid, introducing batteries to the transportation sector, we will, for the first time, be able to move power in time and in space. So challenging as it has been, it's now possible to solve it. Something that this comes with is to really make sure that we do incentivize further build-outs, so that we make sure that when we calculate carbon footprint, we are not calculating it based on paperwork. We are actually making sure that the feed of clean electricity is going directly to the source. And why do I say this? It's because I'm an idealist. I think it's very important that we are really doing this for a cleaner future, and that we are really doing this to make sure that we meet the Paris Agreement. And I think that this is also in strong favor of the Nordics, that we have this advantage, and that the direct feed of hydropower will be really taken into account in the competition between other industrializations. And Northvolt did, as I said, we did set up very, very early a very high ambition when it came to sustainability. I was hired early with a role to, not from an administration point of view, but from a technology point of view and from a business perspective, build a brand and build a solution-oriented platform for making sure that our batteries are green, that our factories are green, and that we support the market in this transformation. And we are looking at this in the entire loop of the battery, so from cell to cell. And we are also working very, very hard with the mining sector. We have a strong advantage, and I'm going to come back to that in the next slide. But the advantage that we have is something that we call the vertical integration, which means that we are doing most of the preparation of the materials on the cathode side ourselves. And this means that we can have a very direct relationship and partner up with the mining sector, and we can be very selective in who we buy from. And we have put a very strong backstop to some of the to some of the ethical standards that we have a challenge with in the sector. And we think that it's incredibly important that we continue having very high standards going forward. But we also put targets to the mining sector, and we work with this in several ways. One way is by collaborating with Epiroc in doing a strong technology development project for the mining sector, and we actually have batteries in heavy vehicles in the mining sector as we speak. But another way is to make sure that we select the right partners. And the most common question I often get, and that if we would have a Q&A, someone would ask me today, would be, how about Congo? How about DRC? What's your activity there? And we did very early identify DRC as one of the markets that we could probably forever not avoid. We also saw DRC as a market that is very strongly influencing the sector as a whole. So even if we don't buy there from, someone will, and we need to build the battery industry in Europe strongly. So we're going to be influenced by it. So therefore, about 2 years ago, me and our Chief Operating Officer, Paolo Cerutti, paid a visit to Congo. We traveled around the mining sector, and we basically saw most varieties of mining operations that are to be found there. We discovered that it is possible to find really good entrepreneurs locally, but that it takes a lot of due diligence and audit processes to be set in order to do it. And as of today, we are not signing any contracts with Congo, but we have the ambition to be collaborating in Europe or ourselves being involved in some project that would support Congo into going into a strong industrialization. Because we think that that's important, and we think that any country that is so strongly influencing the sector should also be part of industrializing and becoming a strong partner in this. So from the mining sector going forward, we have the advantage of being with our factory. So material we buy goes into our factory, and then we produce the cathode material ourselves. That gives us the advantage that everything onwards is under the roof of the factory on the cathode side, and that's 100% hydro and wind power, meaning that the factory is on 100% carbon-free electricity. And this altogether gives us the possibility to achieve about 70% less carbon dioxide footprint than the benchmark factory today. But that's not enough. I mean, we still have to be considering today's environmental issues, such as protecting the Baltic Sea that we are close to, and also making sure that we are prepared for the future, so that any future generation that looks back didn't say to us that, hey, you guys, all you thought about was the climate change. But what about the water? What about the forest? What about the ecological footprint? What about biological diversity? So we are making sure that we are tracking the entire production from various perspectives. And we are also very proud to be part of the European Commission initiative on the product environmental footprint analysis, which is a pretty granulated analysis of life cycle assessment that we do on all our products. So that's very important. We're also deciding that we, for our factories, will make adaptations that bring us a little bit into the future. And one example of that is that we are recycling the salt that we produce instead of just disposing it into the sea, which is pretty normal, and so forth. But I think that the most important thing that we have on our agenda is the recycling, and we did set up that already from the start, meaning that we want to take back the batteries at the end of life. And we want to do that for so many reasons, but I think that the one that we really need to point out is that this market is growing so strongly, and the raw material need is huge. It's very, was pointed out as the only market risk, given that the buyer side of the market is very strongly growing. And what we see is that all the material that we import to Europe, we really need as a team within Europe to make sure that we have a plan for making those materials stay within Europe and for utilizing those, not only recycle them somewhere, but making sure that we recycle them back to battery grade materials. And especially for cobalt, that is increasing so rapidly in demand, this is basically the only sustainable way to refine it and recycle it. So it's really key that we learn to do this together, and that we set up short supply chains for the recycling, so that each battery finds its way back into the battery production cycle again at the end of its life. And the key to do this is really to cut the supply chain. It's to make sure that materials do not travel around the world before they end up again in production. And it's to make sure that we take as full responsibility as possible. And I think it was one of the previous speakers also talked a lot about this from the mining perspective. But in this case, it's actually about making sure that we here in the Nordics learn how to really prepare these materials ourselves, and to make sure that we understand the complexity of that we understand how to mitigate potential harmful effects, and that we take this production under a roof in the Nordics, and that we do make sure that we buy from the most sustainable sources. A normal battery manufacturer in a benchmark factory would buy the material here. So they would buy the anode and the cathode somewhere from, and they would start the electrode manufacturing, so coating the foils, and then they would go into cell assembly. Some do modules and packs. And Northvolt calls this the vertical integration, and I, in the future, will try to rephrase it into a circular integration. But vertical integration really means that under the roof of Northvolt, we go all the way from the metal chemicals through to recycling. And we will even introduce an integration of the recycling into the metal chemicals production to make sure that it's as seamless as possible, and that we cut as many production steps as we possibly can. But primarily, that this site that we found in the northern Sweden, that has a very low ecological footprint, that has 100% renewable energy, that has a very strong feed of power from renewable sources, and that has a very strong industrial tradition, that we do as much as possible under those conditions, so that we really utilize the perfect plot that we have and the perfect industrial setup that we are building there. A little bit about how we are now expanding in Europe. So if we go back to just 3 years back, we were in a very extensive site selection process for finding the perfect plot and the perfect site. We were between a number of cities in Sweden and Finland. In the end, we decided to split the site into one industrial site in Västerås, where we would build a smaller plant with one production step of each of the ones that I showed you in the last slide, but where all those steps would be fully industrialized, so full-scale machines in each step, but not fully optimized. And then we also decided that in the Nordics, in the northern Sweden, in Skellefteå, we would build the gigafactory to produce in the first phase 16 gigawatt hour, but in the expansion 40 gigawatt hours. And since then, we have also expanded to be building a battery systems factory in Poland, in Gdansk. The one I mentioned that is supplying mining equipment and other systems. Very strong for the electrification of the grid sector, which I think is going to be key in order to make this electrification happen. And then we have also announced two very, very interesting joint ventures, one with Volkswagen in Germany to build capacity for cell manufacturing, and now most recently the Hydrovolt company here in Norway, in Fredrikstad, which we are very excited about, and I'm gonna come back to that one. Something small about the manufacturing in Västerås. We have been commissioning this plant for a while now. We are very, very proud of this plant. It is a small plant in our world, but it's still in this industrial area where we have the ABB factories for machines and robots, for instance. It's still the biggest plant. Here we are now commissioning each and every one of the process steps. So if you look at the logics here in this picture that is from above, we have the material production here, and then we have a corridor to protect the material production from the clean and dry room area, which is very, very sensitive. And then we have slurry preparation for the coaters. And in this long building here, we have coaters that coat anode and cathode on copper and aluminum foil. What you can see here, this is how it looks like. This is the long coater, it's one machine, and this is actually on the anode side. And then after that, it's these clean and dry rooms where we have the cell assembly. So the foil is cut, it's put together with a separator in between, it's put in their casing, and the electrolyte is filled and so forth. And then we have also a very nice office area where we have now about 300 people sitting and working every day. And speaking of Corona, we have kept the production and the office open, but we offer testing programs, and we offer and we have a demand for a mask for everyone. This is a rendering of the same plant. And why do I want to show this? Is to show you that we are building the recycling plant in an adjacent facility. And this will be up and running now 2020 this summer. So we are also installing now as we speak in the facility here to the right. It's going to be all the recycling steps. So it will be discharge, dismantling, crushing, sorting, and then a developed hydrometallurgical process that takes the material to battery grade. We developed this now over 2.5 years, and it's going to be really exciting to get that proof of concept out for the process. Looking forward, we expect to be still expanding on our land here in Västerås, and we expect the recycling plant to be here. We will also build a safety and environmental lab to continue building our strong brand in this, and then together with that, the performance and life lab. We believe that any manufacturer on the European market will have to be differentiating on sustainability, but that doesn't take away that we have to be producing batteries with the highest performance and at a very strong cost advantage to be able to compete on this market. So even though we think that the sustainability is going to be hugely important, we do not expect that to be a premium battery. We expect that we will still have to be competitive on all the other factors. Meanwhile, up in Skellefteå, I'm actually jumping in the car just after this, going up there, since the flights are a little bit limited. We have the giga-scale construction ongoing for the first 16 gigawatt hour block. And this is it's pretty amazing when you see it, but it's this is the upstream building. It's going to keep the same logic, and then we are building the 2 downstream line here for the 16 gigawatt hour, and some other adjacent buildings for material handling and so forth. If we look at the rendering, it keeps the same logic, so material preparation here, and then we have the coating and the cell assembly, and then the final blocks here are for charging and discharging and maturing the batteries before going out to customers here. Something that is really going to differentiate Northvolt is how we work with data. And I think that I would really like to encourage anyone that goes into this business to take a look at this, because we talk a lot about traceability when we talked about the product and environmental footprint. But what we see normally is that a lot of the industrial players need to work with average values, because there is really very poor quality of the data that is out there for tracking the actual footprint of each of the batteries. And we were lucky that Peter and Paolo could bring with them from California Landon Mossberg, who is our Chief Digital Officer, who also had that function for the Tesla, building that global infrastructure of communicating with the vehicles. And what we will set up is something we call the connected batteries that will allow for us to trace the materials from the source, the level of recycled materials, the carbon footprint, but also performance footprint of the batteries, and also, of course, trace everything within production. And if we can't do this, we can't really say what happened to each of the cells and how we can improve from a footprint point of view, of course, but also from a performance point of view, how the cells will be behaving in the future. So we think that this is going to be one of the key deliverables from Northvolt that is going to enable all this, including sustainability, because that tracking is so important for making sure we have key learnings, and for making sure that we can advise the customers in the best way when it comes to the life of the battery. And I think key, sometimes I get the question when we talk about recycling versus second life, and I'm a promoter of having the batteries on the market as long as possible. But what I would like to encourage is to make sure that the batteries can actually stay in their fit for purpose use as long as possible. So not having them refurbished for other purposes where they might not be optimal, but actually making sure that the batteries can be on their market, that they're brought home in time for service, that they are brought home before they become critical, and that they are staying on the market as long as possible in their best performance, and then being recycled to new modern batteries with new fit for purpose optimization. You can see how much time I have. Yeah, I'm on this. The last slide I really want to talk about is my own business unit Revolt, and how we have now successfully launched the Hydrovolt joint venture together with Hydro, Norsk Hydro, which I'm so excited about. We are so proud about the Norwegian market. We are so impressed by how fast and how independently from the rest of the world you have developed your EV fleet, and how brave you've been in just solving issues as you went along with this. And this gives a huge opportunity for us that work in recycling, because your market is very mature, and there are already batteries coming back to recycling. So there is a huge experience in batteries already in Norway. And the collaboration with Batteriretur and the collaboration with Hydro, that is also very strong in recycling of materials since before, we think is going to be key in building our future fleet for returning the batteries back, so that we can make new battery grade materials instead of being so dependent on the global raw material industry. So what we will do is that we will collect the batteries, and we will have a very strongly integrated collaboration together with Batteriretur in Fredrikstad. And then we will, together with Batteriretur, we will discharge and dismantle them so that they become harmless, and that they become in a form where we take out really the cells and the modules that needs to be recycled, where other materials are of course recycled on other markets than the battery market. Or they take a loop out, for instance, to Norsk Hydro for aluminum, and becoming new fresh foil for shipment back to the factory. And then we will have a crushing and sorting unit. And this is, it might sound easy, but this is actually becoming a pretty delicate process, where the purity of the material is really determining the success of the plant. And for the something called black mass, which is the material that contains the anode and cathode material, will be shipped to Northvolt, and the aluminum parts in that will be shipped to Norsk Hydro for recycling. What we will do then in Skellefteå is that we will extract nickel, manganese, cobalt, and lithium. And it's worth mentioning that lithium has not been recycled to a great extent before, so that is really something where we also will differentiate, and that will have a huge impact on the footprint of the battery. And then these batteries will become, these materials will become new batteries within the Northvolt production that will then feed the market and enable the customers to have recycled labeled batteries going out to customers. Something that is really, really asked for by the end customers, especially on the European market. And thank you from Sweden.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. And it's amazing to hear the story about your rapidly growing startup, which isn't a startup anymore necessarily, and that fast journey you've had, and the business model you're at now is very, very inspiring and interesting. And I'm looking forward to continue those conversations in the industry in the Nordics going forward. You mentioned also automation and the importance of that, which I think is close to my heart. So thank you for bringing up that point. And we are nearing today's seminar, but we have one last small announcement to make. So thank you to you, Emma, and thank you to Northvolt. So we want to welcome Lars Petter Maltby from the Eide cluster, who is here representing a new initiative that has come into fruition in conversations and collaborations between the Eide cluster, the industry, and us in Innovasjon Norge. Lars Petter, a few people know what you're about to present, so I will not keep the fans waiting. So please share the good news. So welcome, Lars Petter.
Well, thank you very much, Nora and Thea, for allowing us to use this opportunity to launch what we call an industrial initiative. Since 2016, we have actually been working through the Eide cluster with in a cooperative atmosphere on battery materials. So our members, Elkem, Glencore, Nikkelverk, and Norsk Hydro has been very important actors in this. And we've seen over time that, this industry is really matured, as many other experiences now, that there is huge opportunities and industrial opportunities within the battery space. So consequently, we are launching what we call Battery Norway to strengthen the battery initiatives from an industrial and political arena. So a little bit of background. We heard today from first Commissioner Maros Šefčovič. For sure, the battery sphere is dominated by China and Asia, and Europe is now really leading the way for a battery value chain buildup. And it's important as part even in the European Green Deal. I mean, batteries are important for the climate gas reductions, circular economy, and probably most importantly also as part of the industrial strategy. In Norway, thanks to SINTEF and Institute of Energy Technology, Norway has been actually participating quite well and primarily on the scientific areas. And we feel that there is a need for industry also to get more involved, to realize and get the effect of the R&D that is being done. So in Europe, you have what was talked about today, the initiatives of important projects of common interest. Innoenergy, European Battery Alliance, Batteries Europe are very important areas, but we feel and we hear that not all actors can participate in all these arenas all the time. So it's our initiative to do a little bit more of a national coordination that can add value to what the companies are doing themselves. What was also talked about today by Nicholas Fredrik Persson and Arvid Moss is that, you know, what makes more sense is also to cooperate between our Nordic neighbors, and we saw perfect examples of that be through Northvolt, Norsk Hydro, and we know that there are more contacts also between in the Nordic area. So Nordic and Sweden are really complementary in terms of the industrial structure and experience of Norway. Sweden as I would say, the Nordic industrial locomotive, Finland's mineral and processing competencies, and Norway with renewable power availability and also the process industry competencies and the materials competencies and specialization of products, and which is primarily exported into the European market. We think that the Nordic arena can be utilized to even further and to build sort of an atmosphere or a common atmosphere between the Nordic countries, and Battery Norway would very much like to facilitate such a role on behalf in Norway, similar like we are doing today. Also, I think probably most importantly is that we saw in Norway a couple of weeks ago the Norwegian government launching a new stimulus package for green transition and transformative technologies. And batteries was mentioned as a key area, but also in the same package, it's mentioned offshore wind, hydrogen, circular economy, maritime transition, bioeconomy. There's a lot of things that we need to do to transform our industry industry and also to deliver on those main goals of climate gas reductions. And we feel that it's important to lift the battery space in Norway because it can, as you mentioned earlier today, Nora, it can create 10,000s of jobs. It can increase the export values of what they're doing today, and even more importantly, also it creates more value on the renewable power that we produce in Norway. So through our, I would say, Batman project and the cooperation with Invest in Agder, we, as you see in the picture, we launched, we had a meeting in December last year. There was enormous interest. It's much broader than the important key players. So we think that there is absolutely room for more cooperation, more human interaction between the battery space, such as the one we are seeing today, unfortunately on a webinar, but that's a very effective way of doing it also. We think that it's important to create the necessary cooperation arenas, and this should be also driven by industry so that it facilitates the development of the Norwegian battery ecosystem. So what we've said so far is really a start. The objectives of Battery Norway are to consolidate and development of a national strategy, expand the number of companies and the areas within activity which Norwegian battery in the value chain do. And also, Norway has a very good scientific competence, but there is a need to educate more people within the industrial skills area. We have to realize on the research and development that's being done. And in addition, in a small country like Norway, it makes sense to look at industrial infrastructure in a shared example, for instance, through catapults like future materials and sustainable energy, so that we can share the facilities to the extent that we can, rather than individually build up everything by ourselves. As already mentioned earlier today, so I will not talk much about that, but it's really the cooperation within the Nordics and the EU is critical. And lastly, Battery Norway will assist and partner with Invest in Norway to attract more investments to Norway. So finally, Battery Norway, as launched today, is only a start. We have reached out to Freyr, Beyonder and Morrow as the battery producers, Elkem and Glencore Nickelverk as material producers, and as our first dialogue partners to ensure that we are creating value for industry. So Battery Norway will be for the whole battery ecosystem, so that we hope that as many companies as possible that find this relevant and want to be participant in a common platform, so that companies and entities actively within the battery value chain join this initiative. We plan to sit down with these initial partners shortly and to reconfirm those objectives that were put forward and propose an initial path which is based on the needs of the industry. I think I have to underline it even more importantly that this is absolutely in order for the benefit of the companies themselves. So they should be in the driver's seat. They should tell what the content of this should be, and it should be industrial driven. So on your screen, you see that we have already put some contact name up, and we hope that that companies gradually come in. I think it's very important that we first sit down with these first founding fathers, I would say, to set the direction, and then we will invite everybody that can see this as a benefit to join this initiative as well. So thank you very much, and I leave it to you.
Of course, a lot of the listeners today are interested in learning more about that and reaching out per your invitation. I know that myself and my colleagues in Invest in Norway and Innovasjon Norge is excited to collaborate on this going forward. So, Thea, what's up next?
We are reaching now the end of today's seminar, and I think I am on safe ground when I say that we are all looking forward to see how the Nordic ecosystem will continue to grow. And we started off this seminar this morning with representatives from the Norwegian government. And I don't know about you, Nora, but I sensed that we had strong support, and that also the Prime Minister and Minister of Petroleum and Energy highlighted and anticipated collaboration, Nordic collaboration on the Nordic battery scene.
Yes, I agree with you. Collaboration was also highlighted by the Vice President, exemplified by the European Battery Alliance. So when we collaborate in Norway, we need to collaborate in the Nordics, and then we collaborate in Europe, and then the world. So also, I noted that Arvid mentioned that in 12 months' time we will see more collaborations going forward. So that's going to be interesting. The fact that reduction of the need for primary critical raw materials is feasible through circular economy puts Norway and the Nordics at an advantage due to our long history and competence within circular projects, which several mentioned here today. And we also understand that through EFTA, there is also a chance for Norway to join in the important work around IPCEI. And we're looking forward to see how these conversations continue going forward.
Investments They sure are important. And we do see that the private sector and industry are strongly committed to boost the ecosystem. The hydrovolt being an important example, which was highlighted in Emma's presentation from Northvolt. And also from the discussion between Arvid Moss and Fredrik Persson, we received strong signals that Nordic collaboration will be vital in the growth of the European battery sector. And they also highlighted that we are well positioned in the Nordics to be in the center of the European battery value chain.
Yes, and we also heard that batteries are the key to cutting emissions from transportation and industry. There is a growing consensus that we need to build a sustainable battery value chain in Europe, and there are several good reasons why Norway and the Nordics can play a significant role in such a European battery value chain. One being mentioned several times today, that we are powered almost on 100% renewable energy, and our long and strong history of delivering high quality materials already to Europe will aid in manifesting this position. And that was our key wrap up today. We are missing mentioning one thing.
We would like to mark it. We have a next webinar coming up on the 10th of August. Before I introduce that, I would like to mention that electrification of the transport sector has been mentioned several times today. And this will be the topic for our third webinar, which will take place in September. But first, we will meet again on the 10th of August. And in the second webinar, we will focus on policy, sustainable materials, reuse and recycling. And for those of you who have registered for today's event, you will get an email afterwards with a recording of this webinar, and you will also get a link where you can register for the next webinar. We apologize for some technical issues this morning, but everything is recorded, so you will get it afterwards.
Yeah, that is correct. We are on that, and you're sure Lars Petter has invited into conversations through the ID cluster and Battery Norway. I know that there are several other conversations ongoing that are exciting at the moment, so I think we hope that this will help boost some more conversations and collaborations going forward. And the ProSyn conference, which the second webinar will take place on 10th and 11th of August, is hosted by the ID cluster and many more partners. And the Norwegian Minister of Trade will attend that, so we hope you will too. That's a wrap. We wish you all a wonderful summer. And like the Vice President urges to, let's recharge our batteries and enjoy some relaxing days off. So thank you to everyone participating and speaking, and to all you listening in. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.